I'm Dirk Kelly with Green Left, here on stolen Whadjuk Noongar land in Western Australia. This land was never ceded, it always was, and it always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey everyone, what's going on? My name is Jono, and I currently live in Sydney, New South Wales. And for the last few years, I've been involving myself in Aboriginal Black deaths in custody here in the city of Sydney, and the Black Lives Matter movement more broadly here in Australia.
Here today to discuss the current state of the Black Lives Matter movement and Trump's fascism in response to the video by Prolekult, American Carnage. Any thoughts on the video so far, Jono?
It's a fantastic film. I'm sure that everybody will enjoy it. There's a lot of really interesting parts. It's just a fantastic essay, and there's loads to pick apart, and there's loads to contemplate on.
To be martyred is to be annihilated and reconstituted as a ghost. A person ends, and because their misery is common, their memory is possessed by history. An image plastered upon signs and raised up as a banner by millions of human hands. This is the fate that befell George Floyd on the 25th of May 2020 as he was crushed on Minneapolis tarmac. He, father, husband and friend, was ended, joining a seemingly infinite list of black and oppressed people murdered by the US's police forces. In the following days and weeks, as protests surged, first across the United States and then the world, his memory was possessed. The movement that has blossomed as a consequence of his murder is the subject of this video. To the man and those who loved him, we offer first our sorrow, our rage, and our ears. May he rest in power.
I don't have a lot to say because I can't get my words together right now. But I wanted everybody to know that this is what those officers took. At the end of the day, they get to go home and be with their families. Shiana does not have a father. He will never see her grow up, graduate. He will never walk her down the aisle. If it's a problem she's having and she needs her dad, she does not have that anymore. I'm here for my baby. And I'm here for George because I want justice for him. I want justice for him because he was good. No matter what anybody thinks, he was good. And this is the proof that he was a good man.
If the masses of our people suffer for our advancement, progress only comes when the masses advance. If the masses do not progress, there's no progress at all. If one knows this, there's no discussion about since the 60s. Certainly since the 60s, many individuals have climbed up. Some have become mayors, some basketball players, some football players, some on television, some movie directors. All of this is a result of the struggles of the masses of people. But the conditions of the masses of our people become worse. For someone to discuss progress means that they're clearly confused. There's been no progress for our people. The conditions are worse. The only progress for our people is a rising consciousness of the masses which will never stop. Aside from the rising consciousness of our people, the conditions are worse for the masses of our people. If you have rising consciousness and worse conditions, there's no question you're heading for the path of revolution.
It is impossible to account for the depth of the US state's racist depravity, let alone summarize it. At each point that one feels they have reached the bottom of the barrel, another barrel is uncovered. This can be swiftly illustrated. Between 2014 and 2019, police in the United States are acknowledged to have killed 6,557 people, 25% of them black. Black people constitute 38% of the US prison population. This is despite the fact that black people account for only 13% of the US population. As astonishingly despicable as these statistics are, they are but the tip of the iceberg. A report on the New York Police Department's use of force, produced and suppressed in 2017, illustrates this clearly, estimating that police murders were at least double that reported officially. Whilst the majority of the world peers into this violence only when it flares into a people's confrontation, it is constant, ferocious, and deeply rooted in the history and character of the US state. This nation, built upon genocide and chattel slavery, has never changed, despite the heroism and sacrifice of those who have stood to resist it. The continuity is stark. The lynch mobs which hunted escaped slaves in the southern states have formed into their police departments and settled across the whole country. The peoples placed in chains by chattel slavery today make up the largest population demographic of its prisons, where such slavery is not only legal, but practiced. This is to say, in statistics and historical reference, what many have said simply and directly. The US's state and society are the state and society of white supremacy. It is, so to speak, in the nation's blood. This oppression, which impacts upon every element of life, has intensified considerably since the outbreak of the coronavirus. A crucial observation if one is to grasp our present conjecture. This is clear from the scale of COVID-19 deaths within the black population, 25% of the US's total toll, one of the largest in the globe. Where the shadow of death has not been felt directly, the violence of poverty stands in for it. Of the millions made unemployed in the US by the global collapse of imperialist capitalism, unemployment for the black population has grown fastest, from 5.8% in February to at least 16.8% in May, higher than it was for this section at the height of the Great Depression, in comparison to a May statistic of 12.4% for the US's white population. For the black proletariat in the United States in particular, this intensification has made life intolerable. The eruption which followed George Floyd's murder is thus the result of two contexts intertwining: a permanent violence ingrained into the character of the US and already intensifying under the reaction which defines its contemporary politics, has been brought to a boil by the first pangs of its collapse. The significance of the renewal of the Black Lives Matter movement was evident from its dawning moments. As police set upon the largely black and working-class protesters assembled to demand justice in Minneapolis on the 26th of May, an avalanche was set in motion. A police station was burnt down on but the third night. The violence of those who answered to it was recorded and spilt through phones across the globe. Within a week, demonstrations were underway in every state in the US. Despite horrific police oppression, attacks from the far right, the activation of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., following confrontations outside of the White House, and curfews in over 200 cities. Whilst the ferociousness of this early explosion has waned in some senses, with liberal and opportunist forces attempting to co-opt demands for police abolition into demands for police reform, and both police and National Guard employing counterinsurgency tactics applied in Iraq and Afghanistan to de-escalate tension at key moments. It is clear that what remains is a considerably serious political movement. Protests have continued for over a month at time of writing, and Black Lives Matter has emerged as a movement across a huge number of nations in both the imperialist and oppressed world, each reacting not only to the situation in the States, but also to the violence and racism of their own ruling class or those imposed upon them. More than this, it is clear that the movement in the US is in the process of developing a serious organisational base, with political projects mounted in many communities, a Capitol Hill autonomous zone holding space in Seattle from the 8th of June, albeit with considerable compromise, and solidarity from striking dock workers, shutting down 29 ports on the US's west coast on the 19th of June. The capacity of the forces which have revealed themselves to stop oppression is, however, perhaps most clearly illustrated by the breakup of a police kidnapping and sexual assault ring by Milwaukee community members on the 24th of June. The oppressed have again burst into US history as a real force.
They came for us with AR-15s, robots, military gear for mothers and babies. So I think at this time, it is important that we stick together and we organize. After this righteous anger, we get in our communities and we organize. Because we the people, this system is crumbling. It is crumbling. We're seeing it all over the world. We are going to decide what happens next.
Yeah, there's so many moving parts when it comes to this topic of the martyrdom of George Floyd and the subsequent uprisings that's taking place all across the country. As we're recording this right now, we can see as of within what is this? Well, we can say liberally, the last 30 some odd hours, we're watching again the same sort of pathological ideas, ideologies and methodologies of the state unfolding in this is me talking like a little bit off the cuff, but I'm not sure if you've seen the video of what took place in Wisconsin, Jacob Blake. That was it's just like with George Floyd. That was an execution. They pull him onto the back of the shirt, and then he fires, multiple rounds.
This is in front of his children.
Yeah, the children were in the car. It's horrific to
Yeah.
even try to um, put this into a perspective where it's like the social and psychological effects, that we see constantly. People being portrayed like this in the mainstream media and and social media has such a deep impact. Not just on African Americans, but people of color more broadly, and we continue to see that sort of aspect affecting First Nations peoples here and their cause to fight the state institutions here, and it's just like I said, a lot of the things that I talk about when it comes to this sort of stuff, especially on my podcast, it's always like I said, the social and psychological implications of that. So this is me speaking from like a black male, a black male perspective, and um, to see that constantly portrayed in the media is also it's also indicative of the violence. It's like to literally telling you what kind of bodies that they want to make vulnerable. So yeah, those are the kind of aspects I try to bring up as much as I possibly can when we talk about this martyrdom and
Yeah.
etc. Yeah.
Yeah. This is the sacrifices that the state is allowed to make.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Precisely. Yeah.
And so, how are people responding to that? How have things changed? Because the Black Lives Matter movement isn't new. It's been going for many years. How is it evolving now?
I see it moving. Well, as in, with the beginning of this, as we touched on with, the lynching, the murder of George Floyd. And I continue to see this evolution with the people that are on the ground in the United States, where we've seen people move on this scale from defunding the police to talks of abolition. And I think that's like one of the most important gears that people are beginning to pick up at this moment. And along with that, we're continue to see the aspects that not only just like touch our daily lives, but it comes to the institutions of prisons, but the manufacturers and the people who finance these sorts of things, and these sorts of legislation are all kind of coming into light in this justice movement. And I think that's one of the most important things that people have kind of picked up in this moment. And this is a personal opinion getting ready to speak here. But there's Geo Group Australia, there's Core Civic, there's Serco, etc. And through this and through a lot of the coronial inquests, I've seen people picking up the same sort of language as well. So you can see this unification from the United States and Australia about these killings and these murders.
There seems to be a lot of parallels between Australia and the US. Australia seems to follow in the footsteps of the US. There's actually legislation that says that if the US goes into war, Australia is immediately declared war on the same entities as well. And that seems to really come at the base through the culture. And of course, our culture is based on our material conditions. So like you were saying, there's the same corporations, maybe they have different names, but they have the same strategies and policies operate between these two nations.
Ever since now we're looking over 200 some odd years since the landing of the Endeavour, right, and James Cook, we continue to see that history play itself out of like the othering of people, a genocidal aspect to the land accumulation and the seizing of property, right, property, because this is in that realm there, but of the land and of the community and of the lives of First Nations people. And I would be one to argue, just like what is happening in Canada, and also again our main reflection here being the United States. That is one solely of a racist, white supremacist framework there. Because if people want to be able to try to like push in on this avenue and say that Australia is not like a nation steeped. This is, like I said, personal opinion speaking here, but I feel like there's a lot of aspects of casual racism, and when it comes to the more overt aspects of what's happening in this country. We can look to places like Manus and Nauru, or the biggest one for me that was like the biggest shocker was the Northern Territory intervention. Whenever I look back on the history of that, all I can see there is the othering of people, the using of this rhetoric of like pedophilia and like all this like the degenerative language to try to continue the oppression of First Nations people. So yeah, to your point, yeah, I would say that these aspects are deeply ingrained in the white supremacist psychology, and we can see that reflected in so many different aspects of the society here.
Absolutely. You mentioned Canada. I think that, we saw similar things in the UK with Brexit really latching onto that othering of people to drive home a point of a white Britain, essentially. And those roots, they don't come from nowhere. There is an imperialist root to all of these nations. There is a core material aspect to the colonization of these lands and the spread of power and the domination of property that came out of the UK through these other nations. The effect that COVID-19, which has been quite a trigger on a lot of things lately, has had across the globe, you see this sort of reflection in the imperialist nations of how they responded. You see Britain not paying attention to it, hoping that it'll just go away. The UK doing the same. I think as anyone who's analysing Australia and not taking into consideration that it's a completely isolated country and is just lucky in many ways, and it's still been ravaged. There seems to be this like core state power between all of these entities that then we see as individuals in our countries or in our local communities how it plays out through racist policing, through racist institutions. But really, it's all coming from one place. So imperialism seems to have really been caught in a trap by COVID-19. It doesn't know how to really handle it.
So not by any stretch of the imagination. Again, not to try to make this conversation so, like American centric when it comes to this, because, we're trying to draw on a wider aspect. But as you pointed out so eloquently, these technology companies, these biomedical companies, etc., they are all serving a very concerted set of agendas here. And if we were to be in a world, let's say, right, where some of these aspects were looked at more, and I guess like a more fruitful or egalitarian, right, aspect, we wouldn't have seen nearly as many of the causes, or to try to push forward on that a little bit more, we wouldn't have seen, even if the causes were still available to people, to oppress people through the aspects of what's going on, we would have had a realm of debate, a realm of discussion in order to push back on them. And this is all, like we had pointed out before, these are all concerted efforts, not just made by these companies, but through their legislation and the way that they see property and the way that they see human life.
Fantastic point you make. It's very steamrolly at this point, I've noticed. There is no discussion or debate. Like, Australia's not even running a parliament at this point. It's just, this is like capital has control and we will make decisions for you as the proletariat as to what's going to go on. And that's really starting to, and I think this is sort of one of the points that Prolekult's trying to make in the piece, the Black liberation movement is a place that people are able to look to and say, oh, I'm also oppressed. Not in any way to the level that the state oppresses people of color and like uses racism as a methodology to ingrain in people a self-repression or an oppression of an othering of people. You talked earlier about this evolution of the Black Lives Matter movement from police reform to getting to these points of abolition. Are you seeing in Australia a similar sort of awareness of the police state?
As far as folks that are involved in grassroots, like on the ground activism, I'm noticing that shift, more and more as time progresses. I'm noticing that people in the populace are kind of addressing these aspects a little bit more, and I find that exciting. For the time for that to kind of the spotlight to be turned here in this way. But it's difficult to tell, only in that like you were saying, the distancing from people and these sorts of things kind of makes it harder to try to communicate a larger message. But I do believe that in the time that we're in now, I think that once the spotlight kind of turns and we start moving into 2021, I think that there will be a resurgence of these kind of conversations here in Australia.
What the fuck?
Out of the way!
Did you hear him?
Get out of the way!
He said, yeah, move. Come on.
Light him up. Go inside now! Get in the hell!
Today I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
The response of the US bourgeoisie to this explosion of popular resistance is complex and diverse. Trump has used this development to attempt to institute himself as a fascist dictator, as expressed by his labelling of anti-fascism as terrorism on the 31st of May, a form of political repression already being actively followed up by the FBI. Repeated attempts to deploy the US military by use of the 1807 Insurrection Act, and encouragement of police forces in their use of barbarous repression. However, in doing so, he has brought a number of contradictions within his project to the fore, fracturing his support in both the ruling class and the assorted militias that make up the political vanguard of his reactionary petty bourgeois social base. This fracturing is perhaps most clear in respect to the US ruling class, with the neoconservative wing of the Republican Party in the process of breaking away from him. Point emphasised by John Bolton's recently published White House memoir. The growth of Republican voters against Trump, the Lincoln Project, and other anti-Trump voting blocs, and considerable dissent from the Supreme Court. The White House's relationship to the military is also under considerable strain, with both the former Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, and his successor, Mark Esper, arguing that Trump's invocation of the 1807 Insurrection Act is unconstitutional. This has resulted in an increasing reliance of the Trump administration upon its far-right supporters in the population, private militias, and the US's police forces in an attempt to secure a stable social base. The violence that this has produced is monstrous. Police murders and brutality picking up pace considerably, hordes of paramilitary fascist forces either deputised or given clandestine favour by the state, even to the point of allowing open lynchings, and tear gas and pepper spray being used as instruments of murder in the US's concentration camps for immigrants. However, this terror does not yet appear to indicate that a stable basis for fascism, in the sense it was imposed in the 20th century, has been formed. This is easily seen with regard to Trump's clandestine support among far-right militias, who frequently disagree upon the nature of their projects. For every more traditional, modernist fascist faction, there are a greater number of unstable, postmodern factions who hold a considerably different vision. The most clarifying example of this second type can be found in the so-called Boogaloo movement, a prepper community, some of which hold an all-consuming process of social collapse and violence as their objective. More Mad Max than Nazi Germany. Whilst it is clear that something resembling a more traditional fascist society is now imposing itself on the US via institutional forces, point made clear by the Department for Homeland Security's use of unmarked military forces as Gestapo in Portland in mid-July, a force now to be rolled out across the country. This latter vision of social collapse is more realistic in the long term for two simple reasons. Ideologically, the Trump project offers no vision whatsoever, save for his own image. It is a brand that does not contain any serious political project, a point emphasised by Trump's decision to give his most vocal support to the conspiracist QAnon cult, who believe he has been sent by God to save America in alliance with the military, and now has a number of Trump-approved congressional candidates. Economically, capitalism is incapable of maintaining the class force which fascism relies upon, the petty bourgeoisie, as the crash it has embarked upon since the outbreak of COVID-19 can only deepen. As such, a key distinction between the fascisms of the 20th and 21st century emerges. In the 20th century, the forces of fascism represented a process of capitalist restoration. Today, they represent the vanguard of extinction.
There seems to be a failure of leadership that is there to open up, well, why are people that fail so hard allowed into those positions of leadership? Why do those positions exist? So Trump and Johnson, definite indicators of that, like, why is this buffoon in power? But I think we've also seen the same with Morrison,
Yes.
I would even go so far as to say the same thing with Trudeau, like his sort of varnish is peeling off, and it's like, well, he's not really doing anything for anyone, is he?
When folks talk about this whole aspect of, Trump needing to be reined in and etc. Again, like I think there's aspects of it where it's like this is wholly concerted by a market forces once again, and I feel like a lot of those aspects are just like it's just propaganda. That's just me, you know what I mean, going my personal take on that on that whole deal, because they speak in the language of market. You know what I mean? They speak in the language of market. So, when they talk about these sort of aspects, it's not really trying to, like we said, bring justice or bring equity or health to people. They're talking about like sustaining a market. They're trying to get you back in the grocery stores, and they're trying to put things back on shelves and so on. And I think that's one of the aspects that people need to try at the very least to barrel in on when we start talking about aspects of fascism and nationalism.
QAnon, there's some crazy stuff going on there. Have you got any opinions on QAnon?
Oh man, this is so interesting that you should bring this up, because I guess you could say for a while I've been like a bit of a like a conspiracy theorist, like a aficionado. I wrote this short story back in 2015. It's called The Dawn of the New Ugly. It's like speculative fiction, but going into the 2016 election, I was just so fascinated with the counterculture, the subculture of conspiracy theory, and how it had kind of become this, and as we see now, we see it reflected so much in this topic that we're talking about right now, where it's like it's just sort of just a part of the pop culture malaise. It's just like aliens and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? So a lot of that, I was like, well, what are people speaking about it today in the future present tense, and where do they see this thing going, right? And through that, I went through a bunch of different message boards. I went through 4chan, I went through 8chan, I went through Reddit, and I started constructing the story called Dawn of the New Ugly, and in it is basically like everything that those guys usually like espouse, where it's like, oh, the collapsing of the American society and the tyranny and et cetera and so on, right? I just find so many aspects of it just so interesting, as opposed to like uniting with one another, or like uniting the human race to fight against these so-called tyrannical aspects. Again, we always see the vilification and racism and these deep psychological aspects of like always like turning people into pedophilic monsters and like all of this stuff. And QAnon, I find so fascinating in this moment, is because it encapsulates all of that. My personal opinion on it, right? And like I said, this is me with the tinfoil hat on. Who knows? I think that aspects of it are like constructed by, I think it's constructed by some sort of the administrative aspect or intelligence aspect within the U.S. government. I honestly believe that because there's just the fervor behind it, and then just the sheer lunacy of like what it actually pertains to, and there's just so many aspects of it where it's like you deeply look into it and you're like, you
It's
believe
very
that there,
organized.
yes, exactly, and it's just too, like I said, there's just it just has the marks of something where it's like the technological advancements of like COINTELPRO or something like this.
Yes, yes.
And those sorts of things are really fascinating to me.
Yeah, you touched on the aliens, and there's an Adam Curtis movie, Hypernormalization, where he goes into the U.S. military's use of conspiracy theorists. So they would feed them information for their conspiracies to cover up tests of weapons. So you have the conspiracy theorists be like, it's UFOs. And they're like, yeah, sure, it's UFOs. It's not actual work that we're doing. It's that. Look over there. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I know, like, I probably sit with the tinfoil hat as well when I say this. This is why I love listening to Brace and Liz on TrueAnon. Shout out to it. Like, QAnon takes this perspective of there's this cabal of secretive people who are taking control, and there's this deep state. And it's like, yeah, but there is. Like, they're called the capitalists. Like, there is a material condition that we live under. There are people who hold all the wealth and power. They're the people who are controlling, and not like through market forces, which we know is like a very downstream, like you have people self-regulating themselves to do the actions of the capitalists. But to throw it all into a conspiracy theory, to bring in the similar things from, the Nazi power of using anti-Semitism, of using racism as a way to create to other people, like, look over there, it's these specific characters, and if we just get rid of them, we can fix it up.
Well, one of the big aspects, like you said, the anti-Semitism and the racism that's like so embedded into a theory like QAnon, because I've had a few conversations with people, with folks. I don't want to get too far into that. But I've had a few conversations with people that are kind of like embedded in this whole QAnon thing. And whenever you bring up those sort of aspects to them, they don't ever want to try to march forward when it comes time to talk about Trump. And that's the thing that I find so fascinating about it, is that this theory has made this very concerted effort to turn the person who was in bed with the lobbyists and financiers through the good majority of his life when it comes to his real estate dealings, to his bankruptcies, these allegations and so on. He was literally embedded with all of these people, but yet this theory continues to make this concerted effort to be like, he's the only one. And it's like, again, like I said, it has this very like Christ-like complex to it, where he's like some sort of savior and things, and all of that just seems very contrived. It seems very engineered to me.
Comes out of these places, these message boards, 4chan, 8chan, these things on the internet that 15 years ago it was just crazy people online. We now have actual people in positions of power in the US government who are QAnon fans. And to bring it back to Australia, and I'll grab a link to this, but there is talk of advisors to Scott Morrison being a TrueAnon people also. And you see that sort of usefulness in having narrative control and maintaining a section of people inside a narrative where they can see the effects of what's happening, but attribute it to someone else. So like you say, you hold Trump up, you hold Morrison up, and I don't know who's holding Morrison up, but there are, I'm sure. On these, like, these are these Christ-like figures, and they're really battling against the real evils, which is, whatever, the deep state or whatever it is that they want to decide that they're against.
Yeah, the pedophiles on the moon that are housing the children and extracting the whatever, and it's so fanciful.
Right, but then it intercepts with the reality, right? Like, you have Epstein, and you have what's going on in reality with these people in positions of power being able to use their positions of power to commit crimes, not being held accountable. There's a set of laws for us, and there's a set of laws for them. And it's right there. It's right in your face. And it's like, yeah, these are people of power, but it's not just the Clintons. It's also Trump. You know, like, it's not just a specific cabal, it's people in a position of power in this society are given rise above the judicial system.
Yeah, again, well, 100% correct. When it comes to these sorts of things, like I said, it's like, it's just so salacious. It just reads like a giant tabloid. And again, like I said, not to try to hark on that again, but there's just so many aspects of, like, when we look into these aspects of this Bernaysian, like aspects of propaganda and just the salacious tabloid nature of them, and people just don't have the gears, let's say, to challenge these sorts of things. Or, like I said, it's like every time you read anything from these QAnon true faith believers and so on, it looks to me like a copy of the Sun or something, or the Daily Telegraph. I really don't see much difference between what these people that are truth faith believers on social media espouse, and then something that you would read, watching Current Affair or something like that. The only thing that is the big difference is the cult of celebrity, and it makes it really difficult for people to try to see through that fog, And though, like I said, I really honestly believe a lot of it is. It's by design.
yeah, this misinformation is not a new thing. This is a tactic. You fill the airwaves with as much crap as you can just to have people distracted from what's really going on. Yeah. And it goes on both sides. I mean, like, yeah, I'll happily dunk on QAnon all day, but the liberal conspiracy theories are ridiculous. And people, it's like our society has conditioned people into this state where they're easily manipulated. They have this celebrity cultism around them. It's all about the individual, not about the historical policies that they've implemented. And you've created generations of people who can't critically think, and who are confused and scared.
Yes, precisely. I would agree. Again, to try to touch on this, maybe this is like a question that people could put out to the air, but we've harked back to this a few times where we talk about the vote blue no matter who. Could we say ostensibly that something like a movement like Vote Blue No Matter Who, or the K Hive, could we say ostensibly that they hold the same sort of markers or indications of like a conspiratorial mind frame? I don't think people are ready to try to push forward on a question like that.
Yeah,
but like you said, is to keep people in fear, is to keep you emotionally and psychologically stunted, and these sorts of aspects are clearly used by the Democratic Party. So
yeah,
let's put the question out there.
We gotta do that again. Uptown funk you up. Uptown funk you up. Come on, yeah. Okay, I like this. Let's keep it going.
The contradictions plaguing the Trump project have provided considerable room for another section of the US bourgeoisie, largely organised by the Democrats or within the ranks of the liberal media, to move. This is expressed in a number of developments. For example, a vote in Congress to render Washington, D.C. as the 51st state of America in an attempt to allow political struggle in the capital on the 26th of June. Whilst this and other attempts represent serious political challenges, they are clearly not enough. This is made clear by the reliance of this wing of the bourgeoisie upon gathering the support of Black Lives Matter protesters by making gestures toward police reform. Whilst the demands of the movement were initially that of police abolition, this process has posed considerable ideological problems for its development. Whilst some of the reforms are easy to demonstrate as absurd and useless, for example, a tear gas ban broken on the second day of its implementation in Seattle, a ban on chokeholds denounced by police unions, or attempts to pass off a slight reduction in planned increases of police funding as defunding the police. Others are more slippery, such as a promise from Minneapolis City Council to disband its police department on the 8th of June, which is now tied up in discussions around whether or not such action is in line with the city's constitution. Although a broader discussion on abolition is beyond the scope of this short film, it is clear that the offer of reforms is being used to attempt to placate protesters in an effort to secure a political bloc in support of the liberal bourgeoisie as against Trump. The reforms themselves must not be rejected outright, as they can provide room for the movement to breathe in certain instances, but they must be exposed as insufficient to meet the demands of the masses or to advance them. It is already clear that this section of the bourgeoisie has considerably different interpretations of the meaning of police abolition than demonstrators. Its last administration continued the trend of hiring private mercenary forces to bulk out the US Army, something it is not hard to see occurring in relation to police forces under the command of this bourgeois faction. Equally, it is clear that the police will not accept these terms, as is brutally illustrated by the doxing of a pro-reform Oklahoma City councillor, leading to a break-in at her house and the rape of her neighbour on the 3rd of July.
Saying once the looting starts, the shooting starts. You have a president talking about the Second Amendment as a use for people to come out here and use firearms against the people that are protesting. This is the messages that we're seeing. I don't know if you on social media, because the news don't tell you everything, but you have to pay attention to what's going on, or else we have a president that's trying to incite a race war, and when the borders are closed, we can't leave. You have people in here that need your help. This is when you and y'all stand together with the community, with society, to stop the governmental oppression. Period. We need you. So then march with us. March beside us. You get your people. Y'all march beside us. March beside us. March beside us. Let the revolution be televised. March beside us and show us that you're here for us. Make history with us, please. Let's just do it. March with us. We'll start marching, and you march with us. Please.
Just
do it. Just to come on. Be the change. Do it. Please do it. Please. We are good people. March with us.
Thank you. Because I can't leave this post, I will march through this street with you guys to that next intersection.
I don't know.
I'll march from this intersection to that intersection, but I have to control this area.
Control. What are you controlling? What is it to control, man? March with us. It was send a huge message. We just march. Just march with us. March the whole round with us. March you and your men. Y'all protect us. Protect us. Y'all march with us. March around like we just did. Do that march with us. Y'all stand beside us. No, you don't, because you the protector. So if you can't patrol yourself. If it's you that's supposed to be patrolling us, then walk with us.
I'm also protecting some of these businesses.
Okay.
Well, can you do me a favor? Can you do me a favor? Can you take a kneel? Can you take a kneel?
I don't know. They ain't enough for me.
Let me see.
They ain't enough for me.
Thank you. Let me see you take a kneel.
They ain't enough for me.
Let me see you take a kneel. Let me see you take a kneel. Thank you.
Let's all do it together.
Talk about sort of what we're seeing from the neoconservatives and the neoliberal embedded powers in their response to Trump. We're in an election year right now. We have a Democratic ticket at this point.
I don't mind a bit of a DNC bashing. That'll be fun.
Awesome.
For me, I kept a pretty concerted eye through social media and through other avenues onto what was going on as far as like heading into the primaries, between the voter suppression that happened with the Bernie Sanders campaign, to the other aspects where it's like these issues with that mad app that took place, and just a lot of the dodgy dealings of the Democratic Party. Again, these are some of the aspects that we continue to see that's this liberal encapsulation of the realm of debate here, where and none of these things where they were kind of just dragged into the spotlight, quote unquote, very, very quickly, and then immediately skirted away from, because it's we just have to march on, who's going to be our winner and so on. It was this, again, the nationalism, this is the only way that we can preferentially govern a nation. This is maddening to me. But the Democratic Party, once again, You know, this is personal opinion speaking, but I feel like in aspects they had colluded amongst each other, because you saw, you know, so many of the other candidates, you know, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, all drop out together. Like kind of, it was like this cascading effect, and it literally left, you know, the party leader at that moment, which was Bernie Sanders, against Joe Biden, and then we turned the corner into COVID-19, and Bernie, you know, to I guess in this aspect, to his detriment, being a, you know, Democratic Party loyalist, thought that it was best to suspend his campaign, and that's how we ended up ostensibly with you know, with this Biden and Harris ticket. Now with Joe Biden, I personally I refer to this as, like, I call it the Obama hangover. Ostensibly, it's just the, you know, the neoliberal, you know, center right wing of the Democratic Party being able to market themselves and idealize themselves as this like holistic healing party of the nation, and how they unite people and etc. And again, we know for a fact that that was not like that was not the focus of, you know, the Obama administration in any stretch of the imagination. You know, he has the U.S. Military imperial forces occupying more countries than any president preceding him. You know, we could talk about the, you know, the global financial crisis. We could talk about his reaction to Occupy Wall Street and so on. And these sorts of aspects should be able to be the groundwork for people that have at least looked at the Democratic Party. And I think these are some of the aspects that are going to try to pull people away once we head into November, to be like, well, do we really want a reliving of this? Like, you know, is Trump really that much different than, you know, what we got in Obama? And subsequently, will he be that change with Biden? And I don't think that people have enough faith in this ticket to really try to barrel through on that. You see a lot of the rhetoric being like, you know, but Trump, we have to get Trump out, and etc. And then as far as like, you know, accountability or policy is concerned, we never really see these sort of avenues coming into focus whatsoever. So that honestly, that should tell people beyond a shadow of a doubt, well, who is the person who's putting ostensibly these words onto Biden's lips? You know, and then again, like we said, you know, we keep coming back to, we see the financial market at play, we see the lobbyists and who they actually represent in Washington being the core focus of the moment that we're in today. Again, then this is just for me, one of my favorite things when we talk about neoliberalism. It should be the reactionary liberal, you know, the identity politics that's encapsulated within reactionary liberalism. And one of those things that I love talking about that sets people on fire is Kamala Harris. It's
watch out, K-Hive's coming for you.
Yeah, the K-Hive, the Karlsruhe State Party loyalists. Yeah, they're coming in droves. How ironic that they refer to themselves as a hive, is it not?
Yeah.
But again, just like with Joe Biden, if people were to accurately and aptly look at the history of Kamala Harris, we can see, you know, from when she was a district attorney all the way up to when she's a senator. All you have to do is just have a brief look at her history, and any criticisms rallied against her in any light, and they're all pretty damning. You know, if I could say so, you know, if I can try to push forward on that. And again, we continue to see these market forces, these identity politics forces coming together and being like, this is not the focus of this. We should, you know, we should rally behind how historic of a moment this is, you know, to have a woman of color possibly becoming the vice president and so on. And like I said, I call it the Obama hangover. You know, I think personally that if Kamala Harris, you know, and this is going to go on record, this is going to be the dangerous part here. I think that Kamala Harris is going to end up being one of those figures where we look back on it in our past, if this ticket is successful, and see the same sort of markers that took place during the Obama administration. So, you know, that keeps me on the back foot about that ticket. you know?
Yeah.
And it also leaves me worried for people where it's like, again, you see this rhetoric so much on social media of like, the down ticket voting and the vote blue no matter who. And I think that that's going to kind of open up to larger problems when it comes to accountability and responsibility in this moment at the hands of the people against the Democratic Party, because we've seen their history, from that, like I said, the early 2000s to the Clinton administration to the aspects of John Kerry and so on. When people talk about accountability, they don't talk about responsibility at the same time. And because of that, the Democratic Party continues to be the only viable option for people. It's madness. It's absolute madness.
I think the point of the Obama hangover is the perfect way to put it. We've now seen Michelle Obama has a podcast that the amount of capital behind that, you are seeing that absolutely everywhere. And they've gone so far. She had Obama on first. He went on to criticize young people for not voting, and really just went again after just join the Democrats, work with us because it's us or Trump, and Trump is the problem. And there seems to be this real desperation to get out the person who's embarrassing them. Because like you said, Trump didn't institute any new policies. Okay, he didn't wind back wars that Obama didn't wind back or that Obama started. But, and yeah, there's been some more wars, but when has the imperialist US not been engaging in wars? When have they not been trying to take control? An attack on Venezuela? Yeah, how many times have they attempted that before? So there's no discussion in the Democratic Party about policy, and we saw that when the DNC just recently did their convention to talk about actual policies, and nothing's on the cards. There's nothing about healthcare, nothing about the climate crisis. They even went so far as to remove the stipulation that they wouldn't have funding from fossil fuel companies. So they're really just, it's all lip service. There's no, you have the people of America saying that the police need to be, abolished, really. That movement is calling for the abolishment of police. And then you're going to put an ex-prosecutor as the vice president? Like, how? For me, it's like, it's not even how disconnected are you from where people are, but how much disdain do you have for people?
I agree. 100%. I agree. I looked at the whole thing, especially, like I said, her record as a state attorney in the state of California. I looked at the whole thing and I just thought that it was abhorrent behavior from the Democratic Party. Like if the thing for me is that if they continue to try to claim as this is some sort of renewal of the faithfulness of the Democratic Party and all this. And as you so eloquently put it, well, once again, you see the same forces at play here. You literally could not have picked. It is the person who ushered in the 94 crime bill. And I know that that's like one of the biggest talking points where people, try to make inroads about Biden, but it literally, the reason that it continues to come up so much is it literally like crushed people's communities, and we're still seeing the ramifications of effects of that today. And that is one of the core starting points. That's like the stepping stone for a state attorney like Kamala Harris in order to build a career in the first place. And people don't talk about that diligently enough. If you want to look at into like personal cases that took place in the state of California, like just literally look at the record that she has as a state attorney when it comes to appeals, when it comes to her actions against death row, when it comes to, again, like you said, we want to talk about climate change in the current moment. Kamala Harris, people continue to bring up the aspect that she literally pays, state prisoners. I want to say, like, what is it? It's $1 and some odd an hour to literally go out and fight bushfires, and it's abhorrent behavior. When people think about these sort of aspects, when they think about fascism, and when they think about these sort of aspects of nationalism, this again is the key function. This is the key function is slave labor. So, as I tried to, this is like a personal story here. I tried to draw on that aspect with an uncle of mine. He's in Louisville, and but he's like a Baptist. He's a Baptist pastor. So I'm not trying to make too many. I'm not trying to get into the atheist or Judeo-Christian aspects of it or whatever. But I had to try to make the same inroads with him. So I just wanted to use that example. So like I said, so us as African Americans, we need to be able to draw on our material history and see that, over the 400 years of subjugation and oppression in the United States, that there are people who are literally in the position that we were in 1619, that we were chattel slaves, we were seen as cattle and, just used for abhorrent aspects of labor and mining and agricultural monocultures and so on. And these people are still, there are people that are in the position that we were in then. And I think that that's one of the larger aspects that people work to draw on that from a historical standpoint would understand why a ticket like Biden and Harris is so detrimental to what's happening at this moment. I think that folks should continue to talk about is the Electoral College. We should have an aspect of, at least if it's like senatorial races or mayoral races, or hopefully will affect the federal elections at some point. But we have to start talking about preferential voting, and again, trying to bring other parties and other ideas to the table and actually giving them a fighting chance. And like I said, that's on your local level. That's like on your city. That's on your city level, which it affects you the most. A lot of, I think, the aspects when it comes to this propaganda, and it makes it difficult for people to try to see to see the opposite end, where it's like literally affecting you at the end of the street, comes from the sensationalized aspect of the elections and so on. But hopefully people will be able to take some of the messages that we have here, and then maybe if there's going to be like a comment section or something like that, maybe leave some links to some on the ground movements back in the United States that are addressing those sort of issues.
Yeah, that sounds good. We'll get together those links and get more information from people. Yeah, it is so hard, being on the other side of the world, and even there's this weird aspect of being like half a day ahead of it all, and your day's over, and you just like watch the US and what unfolds.
As far as like Australia is concerned, there is still like a number of the struggle still continues. As of this week, there is a coronial inquest. I suggest everybody who's going to go ahead and watch this do a bit of research into the coronial inquest. Is closing this week for Tane Chatfield. Again, he another First Nations person that was executed at the hands of the state in a state institution, and the family is calling for justice. Also coming up more and more into the future is the trial for Kumanjai Walker's of murderer in the Northern Territory. So same deal. Try to keep those things somewhere in your mind. Do a little bit of research, and the struggle continues.
Absolutely. Thanks for those points. Make sure to get those out on this as well. Yeah, the struggle does continue, and I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope our conversations can continue. I really appreciate you taking the time today to meet with me. I love the aspect of someone from the American culture being able to see what's going on in Australia and reference it back to what's going on there and start tying those things together, because we do live in a global community, whether we behave like it or not, or believe it or not. And what happens in the US goes downstream to Australia, and it all goes full circle, right?
Yeah, precisely. And thank you so much for having me on the show, man. I really appreciate it, man. Shout outs, bro.
Whilst it is too early to hold any certain expectation on how the struggle in the US will develop, what is very clear is that the convictions of primarily black Marxists have been proven entirely correct. The black proletariat in the US has emerged, beyond any shadow of a doubt, as a political vanguard of the workers and oppressed. Although there are a number of struggles ahead for the movement, their leadership has created, primarily with regard to the nature of the US as an imperialist nation and the question of organisation, what has already been achieved is beyond anything that has emerged in the imperialist nations, save for France, since the 1960s. Both the liberal and the fascist bourgeoisie are fractured and seem to be incapable of stemming the tide. Concession upon concession has been granted in an attempt to break off the movement's support among other sections of the proletariat and oppressed, with decisions to ban workplace discrimination against LGBT people on the 15th of June, to shut down the Dakota Access Pipeline on the 8th of July, and to observe the treaty rights of the indigenous population in Oklahoma on the 9th of July, exempting them from the US's laws in half of the state. This cannot work if it is explained clearly that these decisions are wholly the result of the actions of the masses, that the fight for black liberation taken up by the masses has paved the way for a retreat of reaction, and that this struggle must continue if the nightmares of US fascism and social collapse are to be averted. For what has been demonstrated by the courage and heroism of those standing up in the US and across the world is simple. The masses have immeasurable strength. A proletarian avalanche is beginning.
Socialism is an integral part of building social justice on this planet. The condition of my people, my history, was very much connected with other oppressed people, and I began to see that the same foot that was on the necks of the Vietnamese people, that was on the necks of all oppressed people on the planet, was the same foot that was on my neck. And so I began to understand that imperialism has to go. It is a poison that is killing people all over this world. The priorities of this planet have to be completely changed. And instead of profits, instead of policies that destroy the earth, that destroy the water, that destroy human beings, I believe a policy that protects people, that makes people live in a community, a world community. That's what I believe. That's my basic political commitment.